Trump's victory is already jump-starting the American economy, causing Wall Street to grow to its fifth best single-day showing ever. Now, stock capitalizations climbing by a whopping $1.62 trillion, with the Dow jumping 1,700 points, along with both NASDAQ and the S&P surging to record highs throughout the week. Now, on top of the market surge, the Fed voted to cut interest rates by a quarter point, hoping to bring inflation down to the 2% target.
For more on the economy and where it's headed, let's welcome in Associate Professor of Economics at the Florida Atlantic University and William Luther, Associate Professor of Economics, Dr. Jared Pinson. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, William, let's start with you. Do you think this week's market surge correlates to where Trump's going to bring the economy?
Well, you know, there was a great image during the campaign of now President-elect Trump standing in front of a sign that said, "Make America Wealthy Again." And, looks like he's off to a pretty strong start there in that respect with, the S&P 500 up 5%, nearly 5% on the week. I think that if you look back to the first Trump administration, what we saw was a fair amount of deregulation that made it easier for businesses to satisfy their customers. And at the same time, that boosted those businesses' profits. So the economy grew and the stock market grew right along with it. I think that this Trump move here on Wall Street is indicating an expectation that something like that is going to happen again.
Dr. Pinson, just before the election, CNN tried to run this narrative that Biden's track record shows that the Democrats are actually better for the market. Does the market's reaction to Trump returning undercut this claim from CNN?
Well, in some ways, sure. It all depends on when you set the dates. The rally this week was clearly in anticipation to what the Republican agenda is going to be. But it's possible CNN looked at this and said this would count under Biden. You see these kinds of games all the time. The expectation, as Dr. Luther said, is that there will be a deregulation in the market, and that is just better for growth. There's also going to be the Trump tax cuts will now be solidified. There's no anticipation that those will go away. And I think that's bullish for the market.
Well, let's talk about the other T. T as in tariffs. A big point of Trump's America First policy is tariffs. An easy way of bringing manufacturing back onshore in the U.S. And it seems his plan is already working with fashion company Steve Madden, cutting its production in China by 50% to avoid the projected imported costs. Will the other companies do the same, William?
Well, I think when we look at this move from Steve Madden, we should recognize that they're moving out of China, but we should also recognize that that does not necessarily mean they're moving to the U.S. It almost certainly means they're moving to Vietnam, Cambodia, other countries in Asia where labor costs are very low. And those tariffs that we're anticipating on China are unlikely to bring those manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. So we want to have clear eyes about what those tariffs can do, and we also want to be clear that they're either going to do one thing or another. They're either going to bring jobs back or they're going to raise revenue. But they can't do both, because if they bring jobs back, then those imports aren't occurring. And so we're not going to be raising tariff revenues on those imports. And if they're raising revenues, that means the production is still taking place abroad. So we can have potentially one or the other, but certainly not both there.
The main criticism of tariffs, though, has been that it drives up the costs to make the products, which then gets pushed onto the consumer. But Trump is promising that it will bring down inflation. Dr. Pinson, how is he going to be able to do this? And are people right? Is it going to increase the cost to manufacture goods?
Just themselves, tariffs will do that. It makes it more expensive to produce a good. And one of the things you'll see is on U.S. exporters, if they are importing raw materials, that means that it's more expensive for them to export. The reality is that inflation is driven by central bank policy, and central bank policy needs to be better at controlling what they're doing. They've monetized way too much debt over the last several years. If you just look at the money supply in particular, you've seen how much it has exploded. I know it's come down significantly over the last year or so, but there was just so much money created that inflation was going to be the result. So actually the best thing that the administration can do when it comes to inflation is when they get to pick the next board of governors or the next Fed chief is to be very careful on who they select.
So, William, a lot of people are expecting more rate cuts from the Fed. But if the economy is booming under Trump, is that likely to occur? We have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think it is likely to occur. Inflation has come down quite a bit. It's been averaging around 2% over the last few months. And interest rates are still very high. By its own assessment, back in September, the Federal Open Market Committee's median member projected that neutral rates would be in the area of 2.75 to 3%. That means they have another 175 basis points worth of cuts that need to be made to untighten monetary policy. So, I think that that's going to happen, probably with another 25 basis point cut here in December, and then continued cuts in 2025.
Awesome. All sounds good to me. William Luther, Dr. Jared Pinson, we appreciate your insights and optimism.
Thank you both.
Thank you.